housing code violations, because at this point, the only way we can get those citations done is through the housing court. So this would allow the city to do it ourselves. There was a submission back last year regarding increased penalties up to $2,000. And also the last year's submission provided for an appeals process, because the state statute requires certain appeals where a landlord claims that the housing violation was the fault of the tenant. Those appeals have to go to the legislative body of the municipality, which would be the Board of Aldermen. We had initially submitted a proposal back in July of last year that set out a process for that, but given the overlap here, the July 23rd was given leave to withdraw. And in this current submission, all we have done is cited to the state statute for the increased fines and allowing and requiring the appeals to go to the legislative body. We have not set out a process for that, and that may be something that could be discussed, or since it's really going to the Board of Elders, it would make sense that the committee might want to decide how the board might want to handle that. So I will turn it over to Liam to address some of the technicalities regarding LCI's role under the amended ordinance.
Thank you, Corporation Counsel King. Thank you, Chair Cupo, Vice Chair Furlow, and Alders for hearing us tonight. This is all part of an effort that we're doing at LCI and as a city to streamline our processes, both for investigations and citations, and to make them conform to state law. And so this started, as Council King was saying, with this summer, with the appeals process and moving it to a hearing officer, which would then mirror the process that exists for residential landlord licensing and for our anti-blight violations. All those appeals go to a hearing officer. So we put that forward initially. That was before I was director of LCI, but I was assisting in a consultant capacity with that project at the time. But I think the more salient thing for our day-to-day work is that in the public mind, LCI has the ability to cite when there are housing code violations. Like, that is what most people think is what we generally do, and it is central to our work. However, under the way that the current housing code is written in Title V, it appears to imply that we can only issue these fines once there is a conviction in criminal court. It also implies that the city has the power to put somebody in jail, which we don't, and that's been overruled by the courts, but that language still exists there in paragraph 1 or 2. So the additional, the substitute amendments that we're proposing today would keep the hearing officer appeals and clarify the citation process under 102 so that it follows what exists, and I'm referencing Mark and Frank here because it's the other work that they do, but that follows the process that exists for our anti-blight, which we have a very clear process, and for our residential landlord licensing cases as well. It would be a general citation process. We'd issue a notice, a time. The practice would be the same. We still issue an order letter. It says you have this many days to comply. Currently on the order letter, it says you could face a $100 a day fine, but this has actually not been used. It is a penalty in theory only, but not in actuality. This would make it in actuality because it would create a process consistent with state law that mirrors these other two. So that's why we're reporting this to you. This is part of a larger effort that we're going to be bringing to the alders to conform, to kind of streamline all these processes so that they mirror each other better and conform more to what we think public expectations are and are clearer to the public. I think there's an impression that we give that we're not really living up to at this moment, and we're trying to make reality meet public expectations. So that's the basic outlines. Happy to answer any questions that you all might have. We also have Deputy Director Stroud, Deputy Director Gilmore here to answer any questions that you may have as well.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to start. Can you clarify, is the hearing officer a paid position?
No, the hearing officer is a volunteer position, and that is set by both ordinance and by state law. And I think that my understanding is that is to allow them to have independence from us. So any citation that we give has to go before a hearing officer. So we can't just fine people outright. We tell them what the fine might be, but then every time with anti-blight or landlord licensing, they come before the hearing officer and they're the one who make the final assessment. And so they are a volunteer from the community and they're independent of city employment.
Thank you. Is there any questions from the committee?
Alder Cooper?
Alder Rodriguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you said they are a volunteer of the community. What background do you look for in that volunteer to be able to do the job accordingly and appropriately?
A number of, well, first of all, neither the ordinance nor the state statute requires that hearing officers actually reside in the city. So we do have some hearing officers who do not live in New Haven. The hearing officers that we have now, we have at least one attorney. So we look for someone with some ability to be discerning in whether the conduct that for which the person has been cited is actually a violation of the code, and who is able to be fair and can basically evenly apply the housing code citations or the violations of landlord licensing to the party who's before them. So, and I believe at least one other has been a member on, who is a city resident, has been on several boards or commissions. Paul Wessel is well known to the city in that regard. So I think we have some people. We have one who's, the attorney is relatively new, but she was our first hearing officer. And Mr. Wessel is well known, as I said, to the city and has also some level of, I don't know if education is the right word, but sophistication and ability to be fair, understand what the codes are, and to be able to evenly apply it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One more question, if I may?
Yes.
So I heard you quickly say liens on properties. When and if, when does that, would that take place on a homeowner?
Okay. So the liens would occur at the very far end of the process. So this is governed by state statute 7-152C. And so we have to issue a notice first and say, you're doing something wrong. You have this much time to fix it. Then after that time passes, if they don't fix it, we do a reinspection. And this maps on like all the different ways, you know, landlord licensing, anti-blight, and if we pass this, it will be on housing code as well. Then we send another notice that is like, you haven't complied, you haven't fixed it, your time period is up, you can be cited, and that can happen without further notice. Then it goes to the hearing, then we bring it to the hearing officer. The hearing officer checks it all to make sure we have followed the outlines of the statute and whether he or she or they agree that this penalty, they kind of decide what the penalty applies here. And then they sign the assessment form. When that assessment form is done, then we have to wait 30 days. We mail it, technically the hearing officer mails the assessment form, else I will be doing it on behalf of the hearing officer. We have to wait 30 days to let them get it and let them then decide to pay it if they want. This is all we give multiple opportunities for them to comply. After the second notice, we have to wait 10 more days before it goes to the hearing officer. Then it can go to the hearing officer. Then they make the assessment. Then we have to wait 30 more days. Then at any point between 30 days and 1 year after that, we can bring it, we can file it with the court, and at that point it will become a lien. And so they will be, before that happens, they will have gotten the first notice, the second notice, they will have gotten the notice of assessment, the third one, and then 30 days, between 30 days and 12 months will pass, and then it can go to the court and be filed as a lien. And they'll get another notice.
Before you get into it, I just want to welcome Alder Morrison, who has joined us. And I believe Alder Bedente from Ward 15 was here as well. And one final question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What happens in the interim if this resident reaches out because they need assistance?
Oh, if they need assistance, well, then we would work with them. If there's some sort of financial assistance issue, we would work with them. So this is something that's come up. This came up, or sometimes we can even tell in the investigation period that like maybe they wouldn't be subject. You know, like we have neighborhood specialists, we have people who work with the community, and so we're kind of aware for if like, for example, if I give you an example on residential landlord licensing. That applies for anyone who has properties of 4 families or above, or if you're non-owner occupied in a 2 and 3 family, right? So let's say it's a 2 or 3 family. You see who the owner is. Sometimes we might know that person, or know that person is an elderly member of the community, and they didn't apply for the exemption. Our staff reaches out to them and says like, hey, your property's exempt. You haven't applied for it. And just this week we pulled a few files from our enforcement cases because we knew, even though technically they fall under enforcement, they're really exempt properties, and we could identify that on the phone. So we're always looking. Our staff is like looking to know if we know that there are exemptions out there that we can identify without putting the burden on the resident to do it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the clarification.
If I might, the amendment also allows the hearing officer to grant modifications. We switched, in the amendment, we substituted the term modification for variance, because variance is kind of a term of art before the Board of Zoning Appeals, and we didn't want people to be confused with that. So we substituted modification. And also the hearing officer has some authority to grant an extension of time for people to comply. So the goal here is compliance. We're not here to clobber people with big fines. And we build in a lot of due process in terms of the notices, so people get multiple notices that there is a violation and that they are going to be cited and leaned if they don't comply. But we do try to work, or LCI, I should say, it's my office, not that closely involved with that end, but the goal here is to try to get compliance.
And one other clarifying question. So if you have a repeat offender, say someone who is who's not in compliance over and over and over again, is there a path through this state statute to allow for a revocation of their rental license?
So there isn't necessarily clearly a path for revocation of rental license. This is something we'll be looking at as we're thinking about making the other processes map on and meet the goals. And if that's something you're interested in working on, I'd be happy to talk about that. And so at the moment, there's not. We can't actually do that. We can, if we're not inclined, we can keep, like the inspection thing that doesn't exactly exist in housing code, exists in theory, really does exist in reality in residential landlord licensing. So if they fall under the license, we can get that day-by-day fine that continues, which then can kind of push them out. We can also put that case before the Fair Rent Commission, which can kind of have the same effect of revocation of license because they might get their rent lowered. So there's ways to help address that issue, but we don't have that specific power now at this moment. One more thing we can also do, and we would foresee still as a tool in the toolbox beyond this, is right now we bring all cases are geared for the state's attorney's office and going to criminal court. It's not a fast process. I don't think it's necessarily the right process for all of this. I think the public expects citations here, but that will still be a tool that we have, and I think for certain offenders, that is a powerful tool, even if the fines there are not as great. Going to court, having to appear before the judge, but we can now, if we were to pass this amendment, we could now reserve that for kind of just the worst offenders rather than trying to gear every single case towards the state's interests.
Thank you. Any questions, Committee? Alder Mershon, and then Alder C. Rodriguez, and then Alder Stephen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. it would help me to hear a little bit more, some examples, redacted, of course, of what kinds of violations LCI has seen over the years. And maybe some imagining of how this revised process would have worked better than what you were dealing with before. You gave like a streamlined example but I want to hear, I guess I want to hear from your colleagues who've been on the ground and get a little bit more flavor about what kinds of things we're seeing, how this process could be helpful in addressing and remediating these problems that too many of our residents are having.
Thank you, Alder. Some of the issues that we see mainly are smoke detectors, missing smoke detectors, missing carbon monoxide detectors, which are 24-hour violations. What we currently do right now is we'll go to an inspection and attempt to get in contact with the landlord. If we're not able to get in contact with the landlord, the LCI staff is back within 24 hours to remedy these violations to ensure the safety of the tenants. We go ahead and we install them. We have plentiful in stock right now. In the wintertime, of course, there's no heat that we're seeing a lot of. We also have heaters that will bring as a temporary source of heat to make sure it meets state minimum 65 degrees in the wintertime. Those are some of our main 24-hour, 7-hour violations that we have. We have, tripping hazards, other 20-day violations that we see a lot of as well. But that, those 7-hour, 24-hour ones, which we try to really, quicker. Without the new process that Director Brennan is trying to get. I think the process that we have now is, as Director Brennan said, if we're able to, start with the, clearing up the clarification of the fine process, the citation process, it'll get the landlords, to hopefully become more in compliance with our city ordinances and take LCI more serious. And we use that as a tool as a reserve for the state's attorney's office.
I appreciate that. As a follow-up to that, could you give us some sense of what's the volume here? Because my perception, and based on what I read and what I hear from your constituents, is that there's a lot. But I'm not on the ground the way that you folks are and your staff are, so that's also helpful for me to understand.
So we have, as Director Bennett said, we give multiple chances. If someone is suffering, like we have just for example, an elderly person who's having a hard time making necessary repairs, but they're at least trying, we'll go ahead and work with them. As long as there's nothing that's life, health, and safety, immediate life, health, and safety. Some of our landlords who are frequent flyers, we do tend to be more aggressive and do take these cases to the state's attorney's office for prosecution. A lot. A lot. It's more than that. We get at least a minimum 25 to 40 a week in housing code cases.
Well,
Yeah.
So, just a point of order, Madam Chair. If we're going to speak, we need to have everything on the record. So we'll ask Director Brennan to just speak up so we can all hear.
Yeah,
Thank you.
apologies. I was asking Mark, since it's kind of follow up on Alder Marchand's question, was about how many do we see a week? And another thing I was wondering that might be helpful is about how many fails do we see? Like how regularly do we see fails?
So we see about maybe 25 to 40 on average. Don't hold me to that number, but a week of at least new violations in the mix. We also do our rechecks. We do have quite a few that are second failed items, but at the same time, say 75–80% of the work is done. We'll go ahead and extend to them, a little more time to get the rest of the work done.
thank you. I appreciate that additional information.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alder Steve Rodriguez, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you. My questions stem around, we have a lot of unhoused individuals. And I believe that New Haven is working to build relationships so that, to do mediation through fair and commission, so that we will keep more individuals, tenants, landlords
Point of order.
together. I'm sorry, I'm getting to my question. have you done the research? And you mentioned about a hearing officer, and you mentioned, thank you for sharing the amounts of cases, that this hearing individual officer, okay, you share that they will be volunteer. But what about the background work that needs to be done? And is there in fact cost? I understand it could be cost effective to have a person volunteer in this position, but the work that needs to be done so that that hearing officer could then review and do what he or she needs to do or they need to do. Have you looked at that? And if you have, how have you looked at that? Thank you.
From our end, we do, I was not here for the first two hearing officers that were brought on. They were brought under anti-blight, and Attorney King could speak to that perhaps. But we brought on 7 additional hearing officers now for the residential landlord licensing. And so we've done extensive outreach with them individually first, after seeing if they would be interested, talking to what the program is and the needs of the program, the role that they would play. Then when they agree to, and it's been approved by the mayor's office, we bring them in for a training, and then they come in for a training. We've done it both in groups and individual settings. So in the group setting, it did allow everybody to ask additional questions and kind of feed off their own, like it's helpful sometimes to hear other people ask questions and the things you don't think of. So we go through what the goal of the program is. Like, it's to protect the health and safety of the public. How did it come about? What do we do? What sort of things do we look for? And then as a hearing officer, what's your whole role in this process? To be, impartial, to verify that we are following the rules of the law and the statute and make sure that we hit all these points, and that if we don't hit any of these points, you have to reject that case. And so we go through this whole training with them around that before they come in and become a hearing officer. And then under statute and ordinance, they have a little leeway then on how, on generally just the enforcement cases that aren't contested, they just review the files and they make the determination. Then when they hold contested hearings, they set out the rules on what side each side gets to say. We had one last week that maybe Frank will.
I think part of your question was about the amount of work that the hearing officers may have. So our staff will be preparing the files, be doing most of the work. That will be presented to the hearing officer. They're going to review all this information, and any questions that they may have, we meet with them. Before we have a hearing, we have we call a file preview meeting with our attorneys. And if there's any information that the hearing officer doesn't have, we will share that. But a majority of the work, I know my staff, I'm sure I'm going to maybe get some admin help soon. Housing Code has plenty of admin staff that will provide doing the majority of the paperwork that's required for the hearing officer.
Thank you. Thank you. My apologies. I'm going to step out for a moment to attend another hearing quickly. Thank you.
Thank you,
Madam Chair.
I have Alder Sabin and then Alder Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, for all of your work on this. I know it's been a long time in the works. I had a couple of questions, if that's all right, Madam Chair. I had one just about clarifying about the granting of authority to LCI to conduct the enforcement. Just from my understanding, right now, currently just only the building inspector is able to issue penalties. Is that correct? And it seems like the change, the statute maybe says the director or their designee.
Or the designee, right. Yeah. Okay, so a little tricky. Yeah, so the ordinance is the director or the designee, and then any of the inspectors other than the designee of the director to do this. And so they issue the penalties, but under state law for like citations. Well, one, as a housing code exists now, nothing. We don't issue any penalties. Cases that do go for state court, then the court imposes penalties, which top off at just one violation of $250. But if we were to approve these changes, basically made recommendations as to what the penalties are, but the hearing officer assesses the fine in the end. And that's how the state statute's set up, and that's essentially what happens with anti-blight and residential landlord licensing.
So that's how things currently work, or that's how things will work?
That's how they currently work for anti-blight and for landlord licensing. And that's how they will work also in a mirrored way for the housing code if these were approved.
Okay, but the way things currently work is that the fines can be issued by, or housing code, they can be issued by the director or their designee, and you're saying that that language is not specific enough?
We can't, because legally we can't, or it seems like, because it says the penalties, unless we have like a conviction, we just don't. It hasn't been done because of the way paragraph 102 is currently written. So if you look at paragraph 102, the original version says any person any person who shall violate any provision of this title may, upon conviction, be punished by a fine of not more than $100 or the as amended from time to time, or by imprisonment for not more than 30 days, and each day's failure to comply with such provision shall constitute a separate violation. Because of this upon conviction language and the addendum of that they can go to jail for this, we've just in practice found this to be inoperable. So even though we have these in our order letters, we do cite to this and we say you are a threat for the $100 a day fine. Those don't get issued at all. It just doesn't happen. It exists just in theory.
Understood, thank you. So, because I was looking at, for example, changes in paragraph 100 where there's expanding the definition of the director to include LCI, so I wasn't sure if that was what you thought the issue was, but it seems like it's specifically that the penalty language in 102 is just not, doesn't fit with how state law requires the citation station.
That's right.
Okay, understood, that's helpful. And then the second thing I wanted to ask about, if that's okay, Madam Chair, thank you, is, so right today we have two items that were submitted to the committee. One that was submitted last year and we had a hearing about that would increase the maximum penalties that we can levy. And it seems to me that in paragraph 102 of the first item, you're maybe trying to incorporate some of the language about increasing the penalties into item 1, which would mean that if the Board of Alders were to pass item 1, the city would now be able to assess the higher penalties that were approved by state law. Is that correct?
Yes, we did that by, in the current submission, by simply referencing the statute that was passed that would allow the city to assess fines up to $2,000.
Okay, thank you for, that's helpful to understand.
And if I may add an addendum to that too as well. Thank you. The one slight change that this would be from last year's submissions, that by adding this hearing officer as well and conform to this process, there is one additional check on that though. So it will give the possibility to go up to the state max, and gives the flexibility in the future as, like, inflation and everything, life changes, and they change the state statutes. But then there's going to be this hearing officer and follow these other processes, and they will act as a check on us because they ultimately assess the fines. So what we had multiple of our, I was thinking as Attorney King was speaking before, on multiple, she referenced that they can continue cases, and on multiple of our contested.
Sorry, when you say they, who are you?
The hearing officers, sorry. On multiple of our contested hearings, they have continued cases, not assess the fine, but say, looks like you're trying, come back in a month, come back in 2 months. If you're still in violation, then we'll assess the fine. And so they act kind of as a check on that power of the executive.
Understood, thank you. Could I ask one more?
One more.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My last question is about those fines, and it sounds like you feel maybe that because there's this possibility for continuances, and the hearing officers are trying their best to be fair, obviously, to both parties involved. You're not that worried maybe about excessive fines, but I was wondering, and you maybe mentioned this earlier, that there might be some room for the city or the board of alders to work on some kind of language that would try to describe what kind of penalties would apply at what time in the process, or how high the penalties might be. So it would be helpful if you might explain what you're sort of thinking about related to.
Well, I can start by referring to when we initially submitted the prior submission back last July. And there was some concern for members of this committee about small landlords possibly being hit with large fines. So I think that idea could be addressed as Attorney Brennan said, by establishing some uniformity among the hearing officers in terms of, the fine value, if you will, of any particular violation. So you have some understanding among the hearing officers, X type of violation, should result in Y fine, or X plus 1 results in Y plus 1. Having been a prosecutor, we tried to keep some uniformity in the way that we made offers to dispose of similar cases, so that people were basically treated as fairly as we could, given that every situation is a little different, but we tried to overall be fair. So a hearing officer would have some check on that. I don't know any reason why the Board of Alders, if it wanted to add to language here, could set up some sort of structure. One idea that came to my mind is to tie it to landlord licensing, because we already have landlords with a certain number of rental properties exposed to landlord licensing requirements, and those might be the types of landlords who might be more exposed to a higher fine, as opposed to somebody who's a relatively small landlord with a few properties, may not be subject to landlord licensing, might be more likely to be, for a lower fine, to be just as effective. I think there are some landlords with a lot of properties that you might really have to assess a high fine in order to sort of get the message across. So there are a number of ways whether LCI could establish, I think, internal regulations around that. So I think there's a number of ways that could be handled. So those are my thoughts on it. I leave it, I think, to this process to yield what everybody thinks might be the best result.
Alder Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry for my tardiness. My question kind of follows up on the fines. And so it kind of, Attorney King, kind of matches with what you were saying in regards to relevance, right? And so, but at the same time, I was looking at the standard fine increase from $100 to $200. Has there been any type of consideration of, like they don't fix whatever? Today is 200. Then, it goes to certain levels and maybe plateau to maybe say $1,000. Because like you said, you want to get the message like, look, you need to comply with X, Y, and Z. Has there ever been any consideration of having different levels of, as far as the fines are concerned or penalties?
I don't know what specific considerations would apply in specific circumstances. I think that's
I think more so frequency, because I know a lot of landlords where you guys will come out and say, do X, Y, and Z. They're like, okay, put some paint over it, but they didn't fix it. And next thing you know, they still have the problem. And now you guys have to go back out and it's the same thing. So today it was 200. Next time you go out, it might need to be a $600 or something like that. I don't know. I just was in reading this. I'm like, how do you really get people to move? And usually it's through the pocket.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
if $100, if I have $1 million and you're charging me 100, fine. That means nothing. But if you're charging me $1,000 a pop, it might, start to weigh.
Well, right, but I think that's a situation, you have to take those on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
I think you have to look at each individual landlord and each situation differently. If somebody's woefully not complying, then, they would be somebody who would probably be an appropriate candidate for a significant fine. But someone who is trying to maybe, have some financial constraints, they might be a good candidate for a continuance to try to help them, get their situation remedied. So I think you just have to approach these things case by case, but still try to establish some levels of uniformity so similar people are treated as similarly as possible.
Thank you.
Alderman Morrison, Chair, may I add a little to that? Alderman Morrison, thank you for this question. This is internally, I can speak to, the court counsel side. Internally, I don't think we've really discussed that, like these tiers. I think, it kind of goes a bit to Alder Saban's question as well. But for us, the most important thing is what you said about the pocketbook, I think is really powerful. And that is a way to hold people to compliance, particularly in a business setting. That's what we're dealing with here. But just being able to do anything is like for us, the most important thing here. And I know Alder Kupo has been briefed on all this, but like the process we have right now, by going to the state's attorney's office, we have to go through 5 inspections, 5 rounds before any file is assessed. Any file, yes. Well, we add one, we add a third, so we could unilaterally take that out, but we do have to do 2 internally. Then the state's attorney makes us do another one, and then the judge makes us do another one before it ever gets to a fine there. And then that fine only ends up being $200 to $250 total. Not per day, not adding up, it's just like for that violation. So if you have multiple violations, maybe you can get a little bit more, but it's like when you think about what's the cost of the business, people who own particularly a lot of properties can just pass that off as the cost of business.
Right.
I think and that's not what the public expects of us, because they see these $100 a day things, but they just don't exist. And so that's why if I were to prioritize all of this, we think all of this is important, but being able to have a process that works to issue any fines is prime goal.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Before I entertain the second round of questions, Clerk Pepin, would you like to have the information?
Well, I do want to just say we should focus on item 1, which is the appeal process. And so the fines, the penalties is the second item. So I think it's good that the committee, I think these questions are great, but we don't want to mix the 2 together because these are 2 separate items. So I would like, if we could, Madam Chair, to concentrate on the appeal, on the process for appeals of housing code citations. We have a lot of work to do as it pertains to the actual citations. But I did want to ask about in paragraph 206, a hearing officer or a board of alders decision made pursuant to paragraph 203B. Could you explain the thought process there and why you are bringing us into this?
Well, I think the answer to that is the state legislature brought you into it. Because certain appeals where a landlord has a defense to a citation that the condition that violates the housing code is the cause of the tenant's willful and reckless conduct. Those appeals have to go to the Board of Alders by statute, or to the legislative body, which is in New Haven View. So that's why it was, because an appeal could go to a hearing officer, or under that circumstance, to the Board of Alders. So that's why we included, that's why the Board of Alders was including that particular paragraph. Because either appeal would be subject to this. How the Board of Alders would want to handle their own appeals process in those cases would be something that the board would have to decide. I think we had submitted a proposal, the one back from last July, which is now has leave to withdraw. But we had submitted a proposed process, but that never was followed up after the first committee meeting.
So let me just ask, so I think what what's happening is, so the hearing officer, so the enforcement officer, that's you, or the building code, or the building director. So you will decide that someone is out of compliance. The hearing officer gave you the information, and then you make the decision based on what the hearing officer has presented to you.
No.
It's reverse.
It's reverse, exactly.
Okay.
So we do the investigation, we say you're in violation, but we can't issue the fine until a hearing officer says, I've checked your work and you followed state statute and you're good to go forward. Or also, we could rescind our second notice, which is the notice of citation, and we say, oh, you didn't fix your thing. You didn't fix this housing code problem. You're gonna go to citation. Then the landowner can say, no, I want to talk to the hearing officer. I'm gonna appeal you to the hearing officer. And then we have a contested hearing with the hearing officer. Either way, the hearing officer makes the ultimate decision of whether a fine issues and technically what the fine is too. Except, and this is what Attorney King is referring to, then in those events when that happens, if the landlord, under state statute, if the landlord has an argument that they, the housing code violation was the product of the willful act of the tenant, the state gives them the right to appeal to the Board of Alders, the legislative body of each town, for whatever reason.
Okay. Just need to hear it twice.
Yeah, that's right. So that's why I know it's very weird language that we put in there. That's why we're all trying to like conform this to the state statutes. And things. These were written way before the state statutes, and now they have their provisions, and so.
And I do remember that that was passed, and we don't have we have not yet created a way to receive that. Or I guess we have to figure out what committee that would go through to receive that once that was passed. Okay. Kind of talking out loud, Madam Chair.
Yes.
My apologies. I submit that to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. So now I'll entertain a second round of questions from the committee, starting with Alder Saban. Is there anyone else wants to get in the queue? Alder Mercer. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have, so in paragraph 102, there is, in item 1, there is some consideration, some changes to the penalties that are applicable, I think. So I wanted to ask about whether you think it might make sense for us to include in this ordinance some language setting out a responsibility to LCI or the city generally to create a fair and equitable process of deciding what the penalties might be. It seemed like you said that you thought that there should be some kind of equal expectation that people are going to be treated the same depending on their situation. And I'm wondering whether that's something that we should include in the ordinance, saying that we expect the administration that through a regulatory process to create a schedule of some kind for the fines, or if that's something that you think should happen in full explanation in the ordinance itself.
I think it could be done either way, but I think frankly, it might be more, at least at this stage when we're all kind of at the beginning of this, it might be something that could be done by regulation by LCI so that they, as they gain some experience, then they would be free to be able to make some adjustments accordingly. Otherwise, we'd be in here with ordinance amendments all the time. But I think it's pretty much up to the board what they think would be appropriate. But I think, given particularly the concern from last year when we discussed the increased fines, there was some concern, legitimate concern, I think, because we want landlords to be able to maintain safe and decent housing for people. So as we said before, we don't really want to clobber them with fines. We want to be able to work with them to comply. So it would seem to me that it might, at least at the beginning here, be more efficient for LCI as they go through this to be able to develop their own internal regulations, their own internal standards, and then that would give some guidance to the hearing officers to still have some flexibility to deal with the repeat offenders and things like that. So that would be my thought on it.
Understood. And do you think that that's something that the ordinance should mention, that LCI would develop that type of schedule?
There isn't any reason why it couldn't be included, I think.
But, well, I guess the more important question is, do you think it's necessary that the ordinance say something along those lines, or would you feel confident that LCI could develop a schedule of fines without the ordinance saying anything along those lines?
I think LCI could do it. I think if the board wanted to, I'm just trying to think out loud here about what language you would want to, how you would want to do that. You could say pursuant to the, penalties imposed by the statute, which is 7-148C7A, and consistent with regulations established by LCI, or, some language like that would give them flexibility, but also signal that there's going to be some sort of baseline regulations, if you will. I guess I'll leave it to Attorney Brennan if he wants to comment on that.
To answer your question, I didn't think that was necessary, but I was looking at this through the lens of just really trying to conform it to state law and make it functional. And I think we can do that without writing it in there, but also I'm very happy to do that if you want to write it in there, but I don't have an objection to that either. So to add on to that question, and I think we could say, there's similar language if you look in the landlord licensing section, that LCI shall establish regulations regarding a schedule of fines. And then at that time, when we do, they have to become public, like our regulations. And then also, if you don't like them, you can then overrule them as well. And so that also puts that out there.
Thank you. I would defer to the chair on any potential amendments, but I do think that it might make sense to have some kind of language in the statute, in the ordinance, saying that the Board of Alders expects there to be some kind of standardized way of deciding how much the fine might be, especially given the concerns that folks on this committee had about really high fines on small landlords that are struggling to pay for repairs, which are obviously a different scenario than the mega landlords that we are often hearing about and talking to constituents about coming to our coming before LCI with lots of violations. So that's something that I would think might make sense if there is interest in that from the committee. And I did have one additional question. My last question is about the provision in paragraph 102 that says that each day's failure to comply with the provision is an additional violation, which I guess for background, I was involved in the passage of the state law about that increased the maximum fine to $2,000. And so I'm a little bit familiar with some of the different statutes that authorize these fines. And I'm wondering if we feel confident that the statute that says that you can have an up to $2,000 fine authorizes an up to $2,000 fine for each day, because I'm not 100% sure that it does. And I just want to make sure that have that right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start, and if Attorney King wants to jump in. I do think so, based on the statute that authorizes this. I know it's been updated since this time, but it's still the provision 7-148C7A. This is also the statute that governs our residential landlord licensing power, as amended to as enacted to the miscellaneous statute as well. But the city was brought to the state Supreme Court over our power to issue residential licenses. In our we do have that per day fine. And this is all trying to map on these processes so so that LCI does basically the same thing for all the type of violations. So anti-blight, which also power rests in 7-148, but just a different subdivision, it has per day fines. Housing code, residential licensing inspection violations also has those same per day fines. That was challenged up to the state Supreme Court, and they were sustained under our residential licensing scheme was sustained by the state Supreme Court based on this very statute. So I think the fact that that survived that challenge all the way to the state Supreme Court would map that on here. And since they all reside in 7-148 anyway, and they exist in these other two realms, I think they exist here too. And that's basically what the idea, but mostly it was the fact that the idea is, that's what the idea always existed here under the housing code, but we've just never been able to do it legally. And so,
Thanks. That's good to hear. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alderman Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. More of a housekeeping question. So according to our staff memo, the draft that we've been discussing primarily is relatively new. It was not the draft that was originally submitted. So you are requesting us to substitute the new draft before recommending it to the full board. Is that correct?
Yes, what we recently submitted was basically an amendment to the original submission. So yes, that would be correct.
This one will be abundantly clear. And I guess, Madam Chair, I'll hold my next question to the next item. I think it'd be good to just know the city's staff's opinion of it. I think I know what it is, but I would love to hear them say it when we get to that item. Thank you, Madam Chair.
It's the same folks.
It's pretty simple.
So, thank you. So you are also the makers of the second item on our agenda, OR-2023-031. If you please take us, present that item.
The second item is the July submission?
Yes.
Yes, so that was, my understanding from speaking with staff was that we would ask that be given leave to withdraw.
Okay.
I don't know quite procedurally how to exactly say it, but that's what we want.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I believe that the request from Corp Counsel will be sufficient for us to be able to vote that as a need to withdraw the decision, so choose.
Excellent. Thank you, Alder Fairlow.
So now we can go to public hearing, Madam Chair.
Yes. Thank you so much for your presentation. If you don't mind hanging out while we entertain public comment.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we're just waiting for there was a sign-in sheet, but never fear, if you didn't have a chance to sign in, we will still have time. Would Alicia Gardner please come forward? Hello, if you please state your name and your address for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Aldermen and women. My name is Alicia Gardner. I am a resident of 375 Canner Street, New Haven. I am also the Senior Policy Analyst with the Partnership for Strong Communities, which is a state-level housing advocacy and research organization. And I just wanted to give some context to that underpinned some of these requests from LCI. I strongly urge the board to vote in favor of both of these ordinances. Our organization compiles housing data by municipality across the state using our housing data profiles, which has federal and state housing statistics. Some pertinent statistics on our city's housing stock to consider is that 63% of all residents in New Haven are currently renting their homes. 48% of renter-occupied units in New Haven were built before 1950, and another 21% before 1970. So in other words, nearly 3 in every 4 rental units is at least 54 years old, and 1 in every 2 rental units is 74 years old. The age of housing is an important indicator for potential hazards. Homes built prior to 1950 without undertaking significant renovations likely have high concentrations of lead paint. Poor insulation is also common, leading to high heating and cooling costs, or worse situations, health risks from extreme temperatures. Other concerns managed by the housing code include issues of mold, water damage, structural integrity, indoor air quality, and pest control from insects and rodents. As evidenced by the statistics on the housing stock, New Haven has very old units, and landlords have a responsibility to their tenants to promptly respond to these maintenance requests. I'd also like to share some statistics on the New Haven renter population, which is again roughly 2 in every 3 citizens. 54% of all renters are considered cost burdened or paying over 30% of their income in rent. 25% of renters are paying over 30% of their income in rent, and 29% are paying over 50% of their monthly take-home income in rent. This means that roughly 1 in 3 residents in New Haven are paying over 30%, and 1 in 5 are paying over 50%. Currently, the lack of prompt enforcement of the housing code violations functionally traps a large percentage of our city residents, our neighbors, and your constituents in unsafe living conditions. Many residents do not have the financial resources to do the repairs themselves or find other housing accommodations. The proposed changes in these ordinances will protect tenants from negligent landlords in a timely manner, but will have no impact on landlords who already ensure safe living environments for their tenants. I just want to conclude that say that a safe home should not be a matter of luck with your landlord, and the city has a responsibility to protect the rights and basic human dignity of its renters. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from committee? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. If you'd like, you can drop off the hard copy with staff.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public wishing to testify? Please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening.
If you would please state your name and address for the record, and just a reminder that the discussion is on the appeal process.
My name is Kevin McCarthy. I live at 171 Bradley. That's useful. Speaking in favor of the proposal, I believe changes are reasonable. 3 additional ideas that you may want to consider. One is a report back from LCI in a year or so about the impact of the additional staff and the changes that they're adopted by the board. Secondly, I think it would be useful if LCI published a list of properties that are required to be licensed and inspected that haven't been, that would be publicly accessible. I suspect if I were a tenant looking for an apartment, knowing that a place had not been inspected would be something I would be interested in. There are other parties I think who might be interested in this as well, like bankers and insurers. Finally, you may also want to consider making discretionary tax benefits or other financial aid from the city contingent upon having been licensed and inspected. This we prospective, but there are a number of discretionary tax benefits that the city gives, where the city has broad authority to set the conditions. And I would argue that, being licensed and inspected, that's what's required by the ordinance, would be a reasonable condition. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from committee? Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any any other members of the public wishing to testify on item number 1? Good evening. If you could please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to testify.
Okay. My name is Alexis Terry. I'm a member of UAC Unhoused Activist Community Team. My address is 266 State Street, which is a drop-in center. I recently became homeless about 2 months ago after my landlord decided not to renew my lease after I complained over the course of 15 months. Landlords aren't required to soundproof between the floors, and with the older buildings, something needs to be done. I just wanted to speak to my particular case. There's certain trauma that's, I don't know, just certain trauma is provoked. I don't even know the word. Triggered, I guess, due to negligent landlords and like just unanswered like responses or whatever. Again, certain traumas are, I guess, triggered by loud noises and stuff like that. PTSD in particular. So something has to be done because there's no prompt response. Landlords can pretty much just ignore things, and it causes issues between the client and case management. So in a way, it's a waste of resources if the client's needs aren't being met. So yeah, I mean, it sets people back mentally in their like trauma work or whatever when these things go unanswered. So and then it becomes like a matter of the tenant having to prove that these things exist. And just being low income, you can't afford to take a landlord to court on a civil matter. So that's pretty much it. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Alder C. Rodriguez.
Yes. Can you share just a little bit what you think could have been done to maintain you in that apartment if there could have been? Thank you.
I just feel like my I mean, I called the police or whatever. They told me it was a private, property management or whatever, and I had to take it up with them. That went unanswered. Then my case management just felt like I was just complaining, so it became like a behavioral issue when that wasn't the case. I told them I'd be willing to accept supportive housing after that, and that somehow led to them thinking that I needed more supportive housing than I did. So now I'm looking for my own apartment in West Haven because I feel like things are so bad between the landlords and tenants in New Haven. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. Are there any other members of the public who would like to testify on this item? Please come forward.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. If you'd please state your name and address for the record, and then you'll have 30 minutes to testify.
My name is Jarrell Alford. I'm homeless. I don't have an address. I am battling homelessness for 2 years due to me being blackballed by housing court. My case fell under non-renewal of lease. That's under eviction court. I've been paying all these monstrosity property managers to tell me no because they're not doing their due diligence by checking the summons that is a non-renewal lease, not an actual eviction of the premises. So for 2 years, I've been suffering in silence. I lost my job at Yale New Haven Hospital because I work in the OR. My job is to keep my patients safe. How could I keep my patients safe if I'm wondering about where I'm sleeping at night? So I lost my income. So as a Yale New Haven employee, homeless, I didn't qualify because I met the max. I made over $60,000, so LCI was not messing with me, or none of these, the castle, nope. I was overqualified with an apartment. Now I'm homeless, unemployed, I don't qualify for that either. So now I'm on the streets because of what? Housing court and eviction. So now I'm under stress, I lost my children. I'm living on the streets. Because of what? I fell in the gap of homelessness. I've been blackballed by the housing court because eviction is frowned upon. And the eviction court is a court, not the actual, like I'm being ordained. It's like a noose, honestly. I can't move because once they pull your credit, if they do their due diligence, they're not reading. I've been in Elliker's office. I've been in communication with Rose DeLauro. I've been in communication with Governor Lamont. They know my name. My name is Jarrell Alford. I've been battling for 2 years. I lost everything. I have nothing. My kids, no job, nothing, because I'm homeless. In New Haven, no money, no money. The shelters, no money. If you're not on drugs and if you're not a man, there's no funding for homeless. There's no shelters. I fell in hardship. If I'm not, they do piss tests for these sober houses. Marijuana, trip. If you're not on hardcore opioids, you don't qualify for none of these services. So here I am, falling in the gap again. So I can't help myself. I can't get out and I can't breathe. And look at me. I was 200 pounds. I have no food. I have no income. I don't qualify for none of this because guess what you need for this? An address. Everything falls under an address, proof of income. When you don't have that, what do you have? Nothing. I have nothing. And I'm speaking for the people who can't speak anymore because there are people that died, that jumped off the air rights garage. I have friends that I lost. Okay, I worked through COVID. I worked the most hours of my career. I am a hero. I'm an essential worker. I could provide all this care to patients and I can't take care of myself and my kids? How's that fair to my mental state? God said, in order for you to have safety, you need food, clothes, and shelter. It's our human right to have food, clothes, and shelter. If you don't have those things, your mentality is not right. That's the foundation of human rights. And if we don't have that, we have nothing. So I'm here to ask for help. And I'm here to say, what is going on? And guess what, LCI? Another thing, New Haven and Greater New Haven are two different New Havens. LCI don't go past New Haven. West Haven, landlords are willing to pass the inspection, no doubt. New Haven, no. So there's no places that will mark and check all these lists that LCI or all these programs want because they don't want to do the help. They don't want to do inspection. They don't want to be top-notch landlords that we deserve as tenants. I pay taxes for something I can't even qualify for. I pay taxes. I'm in the best top bracket.
Madam Chair, her time has expired.
All right, thank you. I appreciate your time.
We
Any
greatly
questions?
sympathize with her.
Are there any questions from committee? Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
There's more people with the same story. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan.
Is there anyone else from the public who would like to testify in this item?
You may want to remind our guests that although we greatly sympathize with the homeless plight in our city, and the two stories that we've heard, Madam Chair, are very heart-wrenching, but this is not the item that is before us this evening. And perhaps we would be able to, Madam Chair, if you would, maybe they can give their name and a way to contact them to staff, and we could see if we can have someone reach out to them in the days to come, but that's not what's before us this evening.
Absolutely. Ma'am, if you would leave your name and your contact info with staff.
Where?
Right here.
Yeah.
And
You want my name and my number and my email? I have no address.
yes,
You got it.
thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Are there other members of the public wishing to please come forward? Please state your name and address for the record. We're discussing item 1, an amendment regarding the request for appeals in the housing code.
My name is Lisa McKnight. I'm a member of We for All Coalition, and I live at 9 Homeside Avenue in West Haven, Connecticut. And I'm here to give my support to the LCI amendments. I lived in New Haven over 50 years of my life. I may be older than LCI. I don't know when they were incorporated, but there's a saying, if it's broke, don't fix it. It's broke. It needs to be fixed. And this, in all the years of residing in New Haven and paying taxes in New Haven, this is the best effort I have ever seen to fix it. I know there's issues about the accountability. I don't know any research, but my parents were mom and pop owners. Those are the ones that tend to comply. My mother, prior to passing away in 2018, when you guys first started the licensing part, she had to go through that process. And it actually, I was like, okay, here they go, they want more money for this and more money for that. And it actually saved our life because we had a carbon monoxide leak in the basement that we would have never known if that LCI representative hadn't come out. So there are positive things about it. But I think allowing them to be able to access the fines or whatever will be more challenging to those that the corporate landlords, because more than likely they're the ones that it doesn't affect financially. And I honestly believe the mom and pops are the ones who are following. So I am in total agreement for it. And any change is a change. Is it going to, maybe it needs kinks worked out here and there, but at least the effort to try to make the change is something that I think is great.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any members or questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public wishing to testify on this item? For a second time, are there any members of the public present who would like to testify on this item? For your third and final time, are there any members of the public present wishing to testify on this item? Alder Furlow.
Madam Chair, I move that we close the public portion on these items.
Second.
Item has moved in second. All those in favor of closing the public portion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstaining? The motion passes. The public portion is now closed. Alder Furlow.
Madam Chair, I move that we amend this item by substitution. Oh, do I need to move it first? Yeah. Madam Chair, I move the item. I move item 1, OR-2024-0018, as they do in city plan.
Second.
The item is moved in second. Discussion on item 1. Who would like to begin?
Well,
Alder Furlow.
thank you, Madam Chair. I move to amend this item by substitution.
Second.
Item has been moved in second. Discussion. Thank you. Alder Marchand.
I'm speaking in favor of this motion to amend by substitution. It is what the maker requests. We should be deliberating on the most recent version, and I encourage colleagues to vote yes on this motion to amend by substitution. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Marchand. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? The item is amended. We are now back to the item as amended. Discussion. Alder Saban? Alder Saban. Yeah.
I'll go right before you.
Madam Chair, I would like to move to amend the item as amended. In order to address some of the discussion that we had earlier related to providing language that would allow LCI to set up some sort of schedule that would clarify what the type of penalties would be under the ordinance so that they would be consistent across the board.
Second.
I propose been second discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The amendment that I would like to offer, which I am very open to any comments or suggestions from colleagues and particularly the chair, would add some language to paragraph 102, penalties of item 1, and the language that I currently have, which again would be open to any edits on, is it would add after and each day's failure to comply with any such provision shall constitute a separate violation, quote, the director of the local city initiative or their designee may promulgate rules and regulations providing for reasonable penalties under this section. This section is intended to be enforced and applied in a manner consistent with other available administrative remedies for the enforcement of anti-blight and/or landlord licensing regulations, but is not intended to be exclusive of such other remedies, penalties, or enforcement actions which may be available to the city. And this language is similar to the language that exists in the anti-blight ordinance and the landlord licensing ordinance, and would sort of grant a broad option to the Livable Cities Initiative to create a schedule of penalties which is reasonable and would set out that the Board of Alders expects that they will do that, and that they will make sure that that sort of schedule is similar to the schedule that exists for the other penalties that are similar to the housing code enforcement penalties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alder Saban, Alder Marchand, as I am. Alder.
Happy to be on the queue when you take this.
Sure. I'm gonna speak in opposition of the amendment at this time, given the fact that it's 7:30, and that I didn't do this in review prior to the meeting. However, I am open to possible amendments, and I thank you for putting together language that certainly does further get to, I think, where we want to be, and the strength of the ordinance that we'd like to see. Alder Marchand, and then Alder Furlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also am speaking in opposition to adopting this amendment at this time. However, I think it's something that is worth considering, and I think it is the kind of amendment we want to make in collaboration with the administration and with attorneys to make sure that it's hitting all the right points. I also think it could be briefer, but having said that, I commend my colleague for offering it. I think there is an issue here worth contemplation, but I think we ought to not do it at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alder Furlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with my colleagues. I think that it's the right thing to do in spirit, and I would encourage my colleague to get it over to LCI and to Corp Counsel and to work on the language, and perhaps by our second reading, it might be presentable for us to be able to vote on together. I'm a little leery of creating this kind of language to go into an ordinance, especially since Corp Counsel and LCI had stated that it probably wasn't necessary because it's already stated elsewhere, and we don't want to make our ordinances too cumbersome. The more we write, the more complicated it gets to follow. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alder Saban.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, colleagues. First I want to just clarify that I had not written this or thought about this amendment before this meeting. It came out of the conversations that we had tonight, and the idea that we were discussing earlier. So I apologize for not having been able to give it to you earlier, Madam Chair. And I appreciate the comments about this potentially being something that might make sense to continue to work on, but at this time I would like to retract my proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Stamen. So we are back to the item as amended. Any other discussion from colleagues? Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to commend the city staff for their work on this. Just the description of how the language was a portion of the language was inoperable, and that this agency was not able to issue fines. It's very frustrating for us, probably more frustrating for the staff, definitely frustrating for the people living in the houses that could have been fined. So fixing that is really important. I like the solution that the staff found on the issue of the penalties, which was simply to reference the Connecticut General Statutes. I think that's an elegant solution in that regard. So I like the changes that are presented, and so I'm urging colleagues to vote yes on the item as amended. There is a thought that I have about maybe a future thing to consider. To the suggestion from one of our members of the public about asking the LCI to come back to us. Of course, we can do that without having it in the ordinance, right? But it caused me to think about what does the actual ordinance order say? And I just noticed that I don't see that. We must have it somewhere. But we have it for item 2, but we don't have it in our packet for item 1. And so you have, when you pass ordinance, you have the title, the whereas, now therefore be it ordained, and then the actual ordinance text is an attachment. So we have the ordinance text, but we don't have the actual order that does the whereas and therefore be it ordained. So if we wanted to have something in that order that directs LCI to come back to us, I think that would be the appropriate place to do it, and not actually in the text of the ordinance that would be in the code. Again, we may not necessarily need to do that, because we could always ask them to come before us at any time. But if we wanted that to be enshrined in the order that we pass, that could be a place to do it. But I'm not offering an amendment on that, because that order is not in front of us, and I don't want to try to imagine what it says. But we definitely will want to see that for the second meeting. I'm sure it's in there somewhere, we just don't have it in this particular packet with you. But I want to be responsive to that suggestion, which I thought had merit, that we should have them come back at some reasonable interval to come talk to the board about the effect of this ordinance change and other changes that are being made in LCI to improve its operations and increase its effectiveness. Having said all that, I'm in favor of this item as amendment, and I encourage colleagues to vote in favor. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Missy.
If it would please the committee, I can read real quick the order. I apologize, I meant to include it. Pat sent it to me this past weekend, so it's very short and sweet. If you want to amend it, so we don't have to amend it from the floor to include it.
I think yeah.
But thank you.
Thank you, Misty. I am going to speak in favor of the item as amended. I think that having this ordinance have as much teeth as possible is incredibly important, as a reader myself, but also understanding and learning the stories with so many folks who live across New Haven, who have landlords who don't keep up their buildings, and who I think could have justice through this ordinance and through a process that is so much more robust. And so for that reason, I'm speaking in favor of the item as amended. Are there any other discussion? Alder Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too stand in favor of this item as amended. And I'd like to bring to our attention that LCI is a community entity that lies within our city. It's not just enforcement. And I liked what happened here when we had our administrators and individuals come and speak and share about the many cases and the implementation of a hearing officer that could act quicker, so that as we look at the housed, the unhoused, it's good if we can get this work done quicker. So I think that this item as amended is on time. And yes, we may have to continue to work on it, and we have the opportunity to do so. But as the speakers in the public hearing and the individuals that came, they think it's a good idea. It's a good start in reference to Livable Cities Initiative. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. One last.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to speak in favor of the item. I think all of us on the board receive many complaints from constituents about unsafe and unsanitary conditions in rental units, something I've experienced as a renter in New Haven as well. And we all need to make sure that our city is equipped to enforce our housing code and keep tenants safe across the city, and secure justice, as Madam Chair said, for tenants who are paying the rent every month and deserve a safe place to live. And if landlords are not providing that, then we need to be able to hold them to account. And sometimes that means that, obviously we want to provide a process for them to address those issues, but that may also require imposing penalties. And so we need to make sure the city is able to do that and able to impose strong penalties in some cases, which is what this ordinance allows. So I am in favor as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the item as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The item as amended passes. Alder Frollo.
Madam Chair, I move that we give leave to withdraw to item number 2, OR-2023-0031.
Second.
Item is moved in second. Discussion. Alder Frollo.
This was a request from our Corporation Council and LCI, and we look forward to receiving any new version that they'll send before this board for our consideration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Frollo. I think our colleague from the 25th ward summed it up quite well, that this is an elegant way to provide it to. So, any other discussion on the leave to withdraw? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Item has been given leave to withdraw. Alder Frollo.
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
The item is moved to second. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That's our September Legislation Committee meeting. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you. Welcome back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I got you.
Hey, I don't know how to turn this on. Should you close out of exit? Exit in there?
You got bumps while you're out.
Oh, listen.